All right, welcome back to PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and before we get started with this week's encounter story, let me take a sip of water real quick. Yeah, and a sip of the Sasquatch coffee. Okay, first and foremost, want to give a real big, huge shout out to folkloresupply.com for their not just following us here as fans, but also for their generous gift to us this month in the giveaway, the free giveaway. If you're not part of the free giveaway, get over to PacWestBigfoot.com, join the clan there. And this month I'm giving away an awesome coffee mug and a t-shirt. There's one in there. If you go to folkloresupply.com and look through some of their t-shirts and mugs, you'll see when it says Sasquatch on it. It's got all the names of Sasquatch with the head on it and the tree. You'll know what I'm talking about. But get on over there and check that out. And I want to say thank you guys so very much over there at Folklore Supply. You guys are awesome. Thank you so very much. And I love my own coffee mug here, sipping out of it all day long, and my one-eyed Jack shirt. So, with that, anything else? Not really. I am putting together, like I said, I'm going to be putting together a whole bunch of you wanted some PacWest Bigfoot apparel and coffee mugs and stuff like that for yourselves. And thank you very much for asking. It takes a little work to put together some stuff, but we'll have it together here in the next week or two, and I'll go ahead and send that out to you guys when it's there. I'm going to grab me some mugs. I'm going to grab me some hoodies and t-shirts so that I can wear those while I'm out and about doing some Bigfoot hunting this summer. So with that, let's get into our call this week. Let me get another clear the throat, sip the coffee. All right. Young boy finds himself playing hide and seek with Bigfoot in Northern California. I only remember a little bit about the scariest 3 or so minutes of my life, David. But as a young boy, I found myself playing hide and seek with Bigfoot. No kidding. Like I said, I do not remember much of that day, except for the few minutes that I was literally staring at a monster that I thought was looking for me. So here is what I remember that led up to that event, and why I no longer hang out at that place, ever. Not even today with my own kids. Happy birthday to me. I was about to turn 12, and my parents decided to take me, my older sister, and my aunt and uncle and 3 cousins camping around Shasta Lake in Northern California that year. I am 49 years old now, so you can do the math. I remember we camped near or around the Pine Point campground, I believe, for 2 nights. Basically the first weekend of July that year. It was a quieter weekend as the 4th of July was over, and so less people. We were basically butted up against the lake itself on the far end of this particular campground. We sat back from the lake about 40 or so feet, but up behind us, well, that was all forest, thick forest at that. There were 3 trails I remember near the campsite. Not game trails either. Regular human-built trails that ran back into the forest, but all led back to the lake. The reason I mentioned all that is because we were playing along them when my sighting and encounter happened. We unpacked, set up tents, and my aunt and uncle pulled out their pop-up trailer tent. The first afternoon and night was great. We fished, ate, had some birthday cake, and I got some cool binoculars and a whole bunch of fishing equipment, plus a new rod and reel. I fished all afternoon and until dark. The first night, well, the only out of the ordinary thing was when some campers' dogs back up the campsite area kept barking on and off all night. I guess perhaps that's the Bigfoot I saw was really around. That is just my guess, though. I remember the dogs because my uncle was a little upset by it that late in the evening. He yelled at them loud as he could to shut up. Weird talk. They had no idea I was listening, but I wanted to take a short nap the next day around noonish. I had been up since 5 a.m. fishing. I caught 2 right off the bank, by the way. However, I was tired by noon, and I decided to grab a bite to eat, then lay down for a bit. At that time, I was alone. Everyone else walked up one of the trails for the last hour. They came back, and I woke up, but I decided to try and sleep a little more or just relax for a bit, as I was real tired. My cousins and them all headed out to fish while the adults seemed to be making lunch, and that is when I heard the weirdest conversation. My aunt started talking about the gibberish talk or some crazy Asian language being spoken and heard around the campsite the night before. I guess there was more weirdness than I had originally thought. I did not hear anything last night, but apparently my mother and aunt did. They started comparing notes as they moved around getting lunch ready. They said it came from the woods not far away. My aunt said she gave it up to a drunk people trying to find their way back to their campsite, but my mother was not as convinced of that as my aunt was. She said it sounded like gibberish, my mom, but gibberish that was intentional. She also mentioned there were no answers to it, so it was only one person or whatever talking to themselves. Either way, my mother seemed a little bugged out by it as she rambled on about the weird talk the night before. She even seemed a little more than bugged out about it, maybe even a little worried or weirded out about it, I remember, at least. Hide and seek with a monster. They all walked down to the lake to eat lunch, and I caught up with them after a few minutes or so. We all spent the rest of the afternoon swimming out on or near the dock, fishing down the way a bit, or just kicking back. It was a great day, but one that changed me and my beliefs about what is out in the woods of Northern California. As we wound down for an early dinner of hamburgers, chips, potato salad, and more cake, it was still daylight at the time. Before dusk, however, and while it was still somewhat light outside, us kids decided to play some hide and seek, of course. This consisted of the old school game, or version of kick the can to go with it. Basically, you hide and try to make it back to the base without being seen. Of course, my cousins being a year older than I had a little advantage. They were faster, taller, and looked like Vikings compared to me. But what I had was to my advantage. A father who spent 18 years in the Army and had been teaching me some awesome skills for some time by that point. My mother, of course, because of the night before, asked us to not go further than a section of the woods she pointed to. We all shrugged and agreed, but none of us really meant to follow the instructions. There we were. We had about 150 to 200 yards of trail to run up and down and all around and back to base camp on. I was elected to seek first. It did not take me long, maybe all of 15 minutes, to find them all but my sister. I kept it up, though, making a zigzag sweep up the trail, the one trail we decided we'd stick to. I kept getting deeper and deeper into the woods, but still I could not find her. I must have reached the edge of where I was not supposed to go when I heard something to my right. It sounded like someone walking real fast. I took off in that direction like a jackrabbit. However, I tried to keep my own noise to a minimum. I got to where I heard it, I believed, and there was no more sound anymore, and I could not find my sister. I decided I would walk a little further past the point that we were allowed, and that is when I heard the walking again. This time it was to the opposite side of the trail, and I yelled out I was coming and that I would get her. And all of a sudden she threw something at me and bolted. A large pine cone came out of nowhere, hitting my foot, and I could hear running again. I thought to myself that she had really been listening to Dad a lot lately, and she must have been dressed in brown or green, because I could not see her. I could only hear her running at the time. I bolted down the trail parallel to her as she ran towards the camp. About 50 yards away, she stopped all of a sudden. I decided to cut across and sneak up on her. It was some pretty thick brush, and the trees were as thick as the brush to tell you the truth. So seeing her from a distance would not be possible. I would literally have to sneak right up to her. I was pretty quiet, but to my amazement she knew right where I was as a pinecone came flying at me again. This time I was a little mad being showed up by my sister, so I charged in. I took about 20 steps when she popped up to my right and ran towards camp. I stopped, looked to my right, wondering how she could have thrown that pinecone from that close without me noticing. I stopped thinking about it, however, and chased her down. I was faster, smaller, and this thick brush was slowing her down. I tagged her on the back just before she entered camp. I won, she lost. She would mention later that she thought I was going to get her earlier. She heard me circling her about 75 yards back, but realizing it was something else later. Well, my sister does not spend much time in the woods today. Come find me, please. This time my sister was a seeker, and we all left camp and headed up the trail fast. I passed the 100-yard limit, I believed, but I was not going to go any further. I figured my sister would walk up this far perhaps and slowly zigzag herself back and forth, back down the trail. It was about 4 or 5 minutes later when I heard in the distance my cousin and my sister's voice hollering as they were apparently running back to camp. I could not make out what they were saying, but it was high-pitched, I remember, so I thought they were in the midst of playing the game. But no, actually, they spotted something out of the normal and scary, and so would I. I decided to move about 20 yards closer to camp, but I positioned myself between another trail and the lake where the bush was thicker. I heard something moments later. It sounded like something walking up the other trail, or near it. If it was my cousin, well, he was cheating by being up so far up the trail too. After another few seconds or so, I could hear him cut over towards me. I did not want him around. He was a pretty loud kid and bad at this game, so I hunkered down under some thick shrubs between two trees. He was just about to me when I heard what sounded like really heavy footsteps. Not like a kid or adult, but I mean heavy, like a giant bear of some kind. I decided to sit still, even though all of a sudden I was feeling a little fearful. Okay, a lot fearful, for some reason. Whoever it was just about to me when it slowed down to a slower walk, as if they were looking for something. Maybe me, I thought. That made my heart crawl up to my throat. Seconds later, it was about 10 yards or so from me, and not even the thick brush could block the view of this thing, this monster. In the darker part of the forest, with the sun starting to die below the mountains, this thing was looking around and standing there. I could see it plain as day, though, even through the shadows. It was literally looking around. However, as it did, it had to move its whole upper body to turn and look, as it had no real neck of any kind that I could see under the hair. When the face moved and it was looking in my direction, that is when I wanted to scream, as I knew all of a sudden that I was staring at a Bigfoot, a monster of the woods. Its face was somewhat flat, even the nose a bit, and scary. The eyes were sunken back into its head, but you could see some whites in the eyes. The brow line was thick, dark, creating the look of sunken eyes, I suppose. I cannot see its legs because of the bush, but I can tell you, I remember that thing's waist being above the bushes, and they were at least 4 feet off the ground. This thing was huge. The chest was like that of a human, only 2 to 3 times bigger, muscular, hairy, and the arms were like Terminators, only bigger as well. The hair itself was dark and brown and was everywhere minus the face. The bottom of the nose to the top of the forehead were practically bare. The mouth was a slit, but a wide one. I would see block teeth when it sniffed the air and looked again in my direction. It was looking right at me. There was no way this thing could see me, I thought, but it was looking down towards me. Run through the forest. Run. The face that had been in my worst nightmares, that face has been in my worst nightmares even today, decades later. I sat there still as a chipmunk when a bird of prey is flying above. But it was still staring at me. It felt like a minute or so passed as our eyes were locked, but in reality it had only been seconds, I think. I could hear it breathe in and out. It was raspy, but not in an unhealthy way like it might be for us, but because its lungs were probably enormous compared to ours. I did not smell anything. Well, maybe a whiff of animal, but nothing like I hear reported sometimes. It took 2 steps towards me, and that is when I saw its face go from a kind of intrigued look to one of surprise. Not a bad surprise, but surprise nonetheless. I stood up and bolted. As I ran, I thought I could hear that thing running behind me, but to my surprise I was caught in the arms of my dad about 15 seconds later down the trail. For a brief second I screamed and kicked, but he calmed me down as he turned me around and I could see who it was. I literally fell into his arms, sobbing horribly. Never again at Shasta Lake. Upon returning to the camp, I found my sister a little distraught and scared as well. She said that something huge was watching her as she walked through a certain part of the trail. She said it stood up, and although she could not make out what it was exactly, she thought it looked like the shadow of a man, a tall man, and it freaked her out, so she ran. My cousin said she heard something, but never saw a thing. As for the rest of the family, well, skepticism was in full play, I remember, from my aunt and uncle, but my mom and dad believed me and my sister wholeheartedly, I could sense. We stayed in camp that night, no sense in running off, as it was dark at the time. My mother would never return to Shasta Lake, however, and when we did camp or go hunting, it was always near a heavily populated area, and hunting on private land when she would come, which was almost never after that anyway. The fear of losing her little ones was to some creature of the woods freaked her out as much as it does me today. I would come to find out later, she, my mother, had an experience with her grandfather once as a young girl up near Shasta Mountain, so I cannot blame her one bit in the end. But that is my story. Thanks.